Okay, everyone, thank you for joining Gersh Literacy Associates for our second of what we call Gersh Talks, a continuing series where we meet with stakeholders in education and we discuss important issues. This evening, we have the pleasure, and she has a very special and unique name, Anica Mrose Rissi. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And I don't want to give too much away. I did do a little bit of homework, and I see behind you, you have a list of your books you've written. I think the count is up to 12 now. Is that correct?
14.
Oh, 14, excuse me. Thank you. And so we've invited Anica here with us to join us and talk about the connection between literacy and social emotional learning. And I do have quite the commute in my car. I spent about 2 hours, so I had plenty of time to listen to one of your podcast interviews. I think one of your books was, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Anna, is it Anna Banana? I think that's correct.
Yep,
And that,
Anna Banana and the Friendship Split is the first book in the Anna Banana series.
yes, and so I think you're the perfect person to talk about the connection between literacy and social emotional learning. And if you want to go ahead and give us an introduction about yourself to start, that would be fantastic. Take as long as you wish. And we, again, thank you for taking the time to meet with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. As you mentioned, I am the author of many books for children's and teenagers. I write picture books. The Teacher's Pet is about a teacher who is so in love with the new class pet, he can't see all of the trouble it's causing, so the kids will have to jump in and save the day. That's illustrated by Zachariah O'Hora.
And I
Watch
think,
out.
and I got to apologize ahead of time. I do this with everybody, and my wife says just because you apologize doesn't make it okay. But I'm going to interrupt, and I apologize. But I think you're a dog lover. Is that correct?
I am a dog lover, and Mr. Strichter's relationship with Bruno, the class tadpole, who, spoiler, grows into an enormous hippo,
Oh, wow.
is based on my relationship with my previous dog, Arugula, who could cause all sorts of mischief, but to me, she was the most wonderful, clever thing in the world. And my reaction to her bad behavior was probably not always what you would think it should be.
And so I ask because I'm a proud Siberian Husky father to
Oh,
Vlaki. She's daddy's princess, and then we also have 3 cats. So when you talk about navigating animal relationships, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I've certainly had experience. And so when I saw this book, that definitely drew my attention. So please continue, and I apologize.
many of my books have animals in them. It makes it more interesting for me to write because I'm such an animal lover, and I love the mischief and chaos that an animal can bring to a story, and also the emotional bond that the humans often have with the animals. So you see a lot of that in my stories. Watch Out for Wolf, which is illustrated by Charles Santoso, takes the little pigs from that nursery rhyme, "This little piggy went to market, this little piggy
Okay.
stayed home," and introduce them to the wolf from the story of the 3 little pigs. So what if those piggies met that wolf? It has surprises galore and lots of references to different fairy tales,
Okay.
and lots of animal fun. And the most recent
The
picture
famous
book,
one I've heard about. Yes.
yes, Love, Sophia on the Moon, illustrated by the marvelous Mika Song, is about a kid who gets in trouble on Earth. And when she gets out of her timeout, she writes her mother a letter. She says, "Dear Mom, I'm running away and won't ever come back. From now on, I live on the moon. Don't try to stop me. Love, Sophia." And she blasts off in her rocket ship with her cat and goes to live on the moon. And her mother writes back. So the whole text is told in letters between Sophia on the moon being mad or getting less mad and having adventures, and her mom back on Earth, trying to create a safe space for Sophia to return to if she would choose to. So this one, we might talk about more because there's a lot of emotional
Yes.
stuff in there, and getting to see what your emotions are. I was inspired to write this book. I have a niece named Sophia, and my
Okay.
my sister-in-law, her mother, who's a fantastic parent, when either of my nieces gets upset, especially when she was younger, their mother would say, "Why don't you write me a letter about what you're upset about? What are you so frustrated? Why are you so angry? Why are you so sad?" And through that, they learn to really work through some of their emotions and detail their anger and what
Wow.
was making them upset and what was unfair about it, and how to, a safe space to deposit a lot of those emotions, and got to know their own emotions better and learn how to express them better through that. So I was inspired by that parenting technique, which could also be a good teaching technique, of course,
Yes.
to write a story in letters, working through some of those emotional things.
And that's fantastic that you named it after Sophia. And I also think you mentioned that crucial point about the safe space, whether that's at home or in school. That's always the goal, especially when it comes to social emotional learning. And so definitely I'm going to read that book in more detail. I did listen to it a little bit in preparing for our conversation. And is it safe to say in some of your other books you do a lot of the voices? I heard a part where you were talking about how to navigate doing a teenager's voice and
Mm.
all that goes into that.
Well, I'm absolutely, when I'm writing, I'm always trying to channel what does that character sound like inside her own head? What does she sound like on the page when she's talking to her friends, when she's talking to a teacher or a parent? Because of course, we don't always use the same voice with everyone in our lives. And then a lot of that comes from how are they feeling in that moment? Who do they have their guard up with? Who are they safe with? What are they going through besides what's happening in that moment in the story or in that conversation with that person? So learning to inhabit that voice is part of figuring out their emotional landscape as well. And so when I'm talking with kids or adults who are writing fiction,
Mhm.
one of the ways we find the voice of a character is by really thinking about, well, what do they believe in? What do they think about? How do they express themselves? What are their defense mechanisms that might show up through the ways that they talk or act in a certain situation? And also, what are the ways that they express joy? We all have experienced the same emotions, but we all express them differently and feel them
That's right.
physically differently in our bodies. And so
Sure.
as a writer, when I get to know those aspects of my characters, I can write them more authentically and more honestly.
And spending time in a classroom with teenagers, which is my primary experience,
Mhm.
those emotions can fluctuate, whether it be in one class period or from day to day or week to week. And so, going
Absolutely.
back to your background a little bit, and I think you said you grew up on or I read you grew up on a small island off the coast of Maine. Did you
Mhm.
find this outlet to express your emotions something that was useful for you?
Um, as a kid, I did all sorts of creative things. I didn't intend to be a writer. I certainly, as a child, wrote and drew. Every kid is a creator, right? That's one of the things I love about talking with elementary schools, especially. I go in, they say, I'm a writer, and they say, me too,
Mm.
because they also create stories. And, those those walls don't go up until more like junior high school or high school of
Right.
saying, oh well, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I don't also do that the way you do. And so I read a ton as a kid. Books were my way of getting off the island, and also a way of understanding my own emotions and experiences by seeing what other characters were doing. But I didn't turn to writing as a way of expressing my own emotions until I was in my 30s. Actually, my first published book, Anna Banana and the Friendship Split, which is the
Mm.
first in the Anna Banana chapter book series you mentioned,
Wow.
about a kid named Anna and her wiener dog Banana, and all of the ups and downs of having two best friends in elementary school. Sometimes it's
Okay.
twice as much fun, sometimes it's twice the trouble and chaos.
Trouble.
But these books, there are 8 of them in the series. They delve deep into emotions. And the first one, as you can tell from the title, Anna Banana and the Friendship Split, is about a terrible fight she's had with her best friend. And I started writing this book in my early 30s after having a breakup with a friend who I wasn't sure if we were going to remain in each other's lives or not. And I had a lot of emotions around that experience, of course. I
Mm.
had anger and frustration, confusion. And it was extremely cathartic to write a story of someone else experiencing those emotions, completely different situation. I was not a third grader having a fight with a friend over a necklace. I was an adult experience, but letting some of those emotions get down on the page, let Anna feel all of them, try to understand how Sadie, her friend, might have been feeling during
Mm.
that fight or during the periods where they're not speaking. Let them find their own solution, go back and revise it, make it funnier, make it lighter, bring out the joy in her life as well as all of the anger, was an amazing way for me to process all of the very adult things I was feeling as I was writing this children's book. And one of the things I encourage writers of all ages, be they children or adults, to do is work through your emotions and your emotional experiences by writing a story about someone else experiencing either similar circumstances or completely different circumstances with the same
Interesting.
emotions, and getting a little bit of distance, because when we're going through that very emotional thing, we can't always see it properly, right? We can't necessarily see where we might not be right, or where we might be very right, but that's not what matters in the moment, or whatever it is. Experiencing those emotions in fiction can be a great way to process them.
And so it was almost as if you were going through a social emotional experience yourself. And so in writing the book, you were also helping yourself, which is interesting because over the past, 2 years that we've been dealing with COVID, there's this word thrown around a lot that some people take serious and some people don't. But this whole idea of self-care. And in
Yeah.
one of the other talks we were having with another stakeholder slash author, I mentioned, because she's an artist and an art teacher, and I mentioned how there are adults out there, my wife included, who will sit down and color. This was, I don't know if you've heard about this. This was something that began in the last few years where you have adults sitting down to color, and it's just, like you said, a cathartic experience where they can relax. And so I'm thinking a lot of people had to discover new ways during the COVID pandemic to deal with emotions. And again, I did a little bit of research leading up to this conversation, and I think I saw something about pen pals and writing back and forth. Maybe you want to mention that, because
Yeah.
I know in school, when I was in elementary school, we started a pen pal program, and as a first year, I'm not a first year educator, but I'm a first year English language arts teacher. And so sparking that interest in my students to write, maybe pen pal program is something to consider. And so if you want to take it away and talk about that.
Yeah, I love physical mail. I love getting mail from friends, from readers. I'm lucky to get a lot of fan art, which is fantastic, seeing readers' renditions of Banana the dog, for example. And so one of the things that I did when everything first shut down and we didn't know how long it would be, but suddenly a lot of kids were being home and maybe their school systems weren't even in place yet to be in school remotely, and parents were scrambling for what to do, and a lot of authors were scrambling for how can we help. People put videos online of readings, things like that, and I posted saying, if you write me a letter, I'll write back. And my PO box, which you can still find online if you go on my website, anicarissi.com, under contact me, you'll find my physical address if you'd like me to write me a letter, and I do always write back. And I got
Isn't it a magical thing, by the way? I'm sorry.
It
As much
has.
as much as we gripe against the post office, and that could be a whole nother conversation in and of itself. But the idea that you can put a stamp on an envelope and send it clear across the country and it gets there in just a couple days.
And
There's
see
a
someone's handwriting, have that intimate, they held this thing and then you're holding it, right? No, the post office is amazing. I'm a huge fan of it, even if it doesn't always work exactly as we would like it to.
Yes.
So I got letters from children's. I got letters from adults who saw the post themselves, childless adults who were home without much to do. I got postcard, and I wrote a lot back and forth. And some kids and some adults, we actually wrote back multiple letters over several months, which was amazing. And some, it was just, I got one letter from them and I sent one letter, and of course stickers back, because stickers are fun. And yeah, it was just a fun way to, it's just, we were all looking for connections in that period. And as you mentioned, I grew up on an island, and this was before everyone had the internet, and writing letters to people that I knew or had only met through pen pal programs was an amazing way to define who I was, right? When you're writing a letter, you're writing about that moment, or you're writing about who you are, and you're figuring it out on the page, which is a slower pace than a conversation and an intimate form of communication. It's journaling with a very specific audience, maybe, or continuing a relationship in a special way. So letters have always been an important part of my life, and that was a special part of those early stressful pandemic months for me.
That's very nice that you do that, and the fact that you write back, and I'm sure you take the time, both as a person and an author, that you give genuine responses. And so what I'm curious to know is, and I don't know if this just applies to the adults or the children that write you, do they connect with you through your books? Have they read one or two of your books first and then they write to you? I'm imagining that's how they know you, and so that's probably how they reach out.
Usually I get written mail or emails from readers who have read one or more of my books. Sometimes it's been a class assignment and they have questions and they needed to write to an author. Sometimes they just loved my work and wanted to reach out to me. I hear from teenagers specifically. I also write for young adults. I hear most often about my book, Always Forever Maybe, which is about an essential friendship and a toxic romance. And I hear from a lot of teenagers, or often actual younger adults, people in their 20s or 30s, who have been in toxic relationships and recognize themselves or their experiences in these pages and wanted to write to me about that. Those are always intense ones to get. And I hear from...
Could you tell us briefly, where can we find your books?
Oh, anywhere that books are sold. So anywhere, any online stores where you like to buy books. I'm partial to bookshop.org, which supports independent bookstores, physical
Okay.
bookstores in communities. Or if you're lucky enough to have a Barnes and Noble or an independent local bookstore in your town, if they don't have the book on the shelf, they can order it for you if you ask for
Okay.
it. Or if you're an Amazon user or an bnn.com user, any of those places any place that sells books, you can ask them for it. Target.com. All of them.
Fantastic. And so just to give you an idea about who our audience is, all
Mhm.
kinds of stakeholders, whether it be elementary, middle school, high school, could be administrators, teachers, students themselves. And so I'm interested to focus in on those two books that you just showed us,
Mm.
because I myself work primarily with teenagers. And so you talked about the one book, because in we're reading A Thousand Splendid Suns in my
Mm.
English class. I'm a co-teacher, and we're reading that book and navigating relationships. And so I think you said Always Forever Maybe speaks to the potential for navigating through toxic relationships. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's about a girl who falls hard and fast for someone that she feels understands her in a way no one else ever has, and who her best friend thinks is very bad news. So it's about the evolution of that swift romantic relationship, which does turn increasingly controlling and possessive, and eventually emotionally abusive and a little bit physically abusive as well. And it's also about the evolution of that best friendship over the course of that, as Bets, the main character, is isolated by Aiden, her boyfriend, in a way that emotionally and physically abusive relationships often are. The abuser often isolates the person that they're abusing, and it's what happens in that best friendship during that. So I also hear from readers who maybe haven't been in an abusive relationship themselves, but have a friend who has dated someone manipulative or controlling, and found it useful to have this as a resource, as a way to think through that. Again, books as a way to think through something similar to what's happening to you, but through a different person's experience and how they
Sure.
navigated it.
Sure. And if we're not already, I may recommend this to my co-teacher, this particular book, because this is a topic that relates to A Thousand Splendid Suns, and
Mhm.
we're working with teenagers and adolescents navigating these types of relationships. And it's not all negative, because although, like you said, you may not be experiencing a controlling relationship, you may know somebody who is, and this provides you some sort of insight into helping them to deal with that. So that's very good.
Or you might, when you meet somebody who has that tendency to be controlling or manipulative,
You're aware of it.
recognize those red flags sooner, because there
Sure.
are patterns to that behavior. And um, especially as a teenager, when you're encountering those for the first time, it can be very confusing, because often
Right.
those are the same people who are love bombing you. And it feels like, no, they love me. Why would they treat me badly? I must be
Yeah.
misunderstanding. There must be something wrong. But if you've seen that pattern play out in somebody else's story, other people's stories, have the power to help us see our own better. And sometimes they can give us the power to help change the narrative, because we understand the course of the story when we see that. So that's enormous. And so I'm always very grateful when I get those letters from people that my story has maybe had the power to help them see their own differently.
Very good. And so let me ask you, is there a particular genre you lean towards more than others when writing?
I I definitely tend toward the contemporary, and I think of myself as being a very realistic writer. Although my most recent book, Hide and Don't Seek, and Other
Yes.
Very Scary Stories, which is 20 spooky stories for middle grade readers. Some of them are as silly as they are scary. Some of them will send a tingle up your spine, and some of them will make you want to hide under the covers and not come back out. And so it was really fun to write horror stories, where of course some of them have that contemporary realistic feel, and some of them have fantastical elements and
Sure.
creepy things happening. And it was a lot of fun to challenge myself to come up with 20 different, not only scenarios, but also ways of telling the story, so that the voice we were talking about is not the same in every story. The format changes, and it made me want to dip into more fantastical elements in the future. So we'll see. But my brain likes to think about a lot of different things at once. So I love to have multiple projects going in multiple different age levels or genre categories. It's just how I entertain myself.
And so when you write your books on these different topics, do you ever do you find that they appeal to a diverse audience? And the reason why I ask that is I'm doing research for my doctorate on culturally responsive pedagogy and how that influenced the intrinsic motivation in students to want to read. And so do your books appeal to a diverse audience of individuals, or you just pick topics that you think are interesting and people can relate to? Is it a little bit of both?
Well, the hope is always that there will be a broad audience of people who will find something different in the book, and different readers find different experiences from different books, right? I myself have reread books and had completely different experiences with them the second time than I did the first time or the third or fourth time.
And by the way, you've added me to your audience now. I'm interested in a couple of these books that you just shared with us.
Thank you. But when I'm writing, I actually try very hard not to think about the reader at first. First time, because if I start to worry about publication, if I start to worry about somebody else reading what's on the page, I can psych myself out. It can be paralyzing to try to think about somebody else reading something, especially as you're writing that first draft, which is not yet as good as it should be, right? Because it's a first draft, it's not the revision. So I think about other readers later. And first I'm thinking about what's most interesting to me, because there are so many ways a story can go. And when I'm choosing what options to follow, I'm choosing not only what makes sense for these characters and who they turned out to be in this situation, but also what's most interesting to me as a reader. So first, I'm the first reader I have to please. Not all of my books will be published. I have to be the first one who's entertained because I might be the only one who reads it. Then once I'm revising and revising and revising, then I'm thinking about other readers and what they might bring to a story and assume or need explained, or what kind of emotional experience I'm trying to look out for them there. And then once it's published, it's out of my hands, and it's up to the reader what experience they're going to have and who's going to find it. And it's fun to watch the life of a book, but it's only mine before it belongs to the world.
Well, 14 books later, you must be doing something right. So kudos to you for that. So I guess my question for you, and like I said, we're gearing towards not only elementary, but middle school and high school students. And I can relate most to the high school students. And what I'll tell you is, most of my students will say to me, but I don't know what to write. But then once they get started writing, they write and write and write. And so for our teachers out there on the front lines that are curious as to what suggestions you might have to spark that writing ability in students, what do you recommend? For example, I sometimes say to my students, don't worry about necessarily grammar and what you're writing, just write and write and write. And I guess when you said drafts and revisions, you spoke to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk to high school students, especially, because like I said, younger children believe in their own creative abilities. They think of themselves as writers and artists, and they'll get stuck and they need tips for getting through that, but they're pretty excited to create, right? High schoolers can get in their own way. It's like I was just saying, I have to not think about the audience yet. They have other things they need to not think about. Oh, my peers will judge me. It won't be good enough. Everyone will see I'm a failure, right? So I often talk to high school students about that. I believe the best way to create any kind of good art, music, visual art, writing, whatever it is to find what's exquisitely interesting to you and strange about you, and lean into that as far as you can. How do you see the world? What captures your attention? What do you think about? What are the things you would never tell people that go through your head? How far into that? How weird about that thing that you're interested in can you get? How much can you geek out about it? And that's how you create a story that's interesting to you, right? That holds your attention through not only the first paragraph, but keeping on going. So you have to find those things that you notice in the world. We talked about I'm an animal lover. Most of my books have animals in them. That doesn't sound so exquisitely weird, but it can be weird when the animal's becoming a hippopotamus that swallows the teacher and the kids have to figure out how to get him out, right? Oh, wow. Or in Anna Banana, Anna and her relationship with her dog is very codependent and important in her life. And that's because it's based on my relationship with my dog and just the role that she plays there. And so leaning into those things of, okay, I not only care about animals, it will make the story more interesting to me if I add a dog. And then what is it about animals that are most interesting to me? We mentioned I'm interested in the ways they cause mischief and the ways that might bend some of the rules I have, behavior I'd never tolerate from a friend who comes into my house. I'm okay with the dog doing, right? So leaning
I think we all do that. I think we're all guilty of that, by the way.
Right, exactly. So when you write a story, let those kinds of things happen and let those kinds of the things that will make it an interesting story to you. Don't worry about what anyone else thinks, because no book is for every reader. No movie is for every viewer. I say to teenagers especially, think about something you loved and your best friend looked at it and they thought it was okay, or vice versa. Somebody goes on and recommends something, and then you finally read it or see it or play it and you feel like, meh, or ugh, or whatever, but that doesn't make it bad. It means it wasn't the right thing for you in that moment. So let go of that pressure and expectation to make something good. What is good? What's good is what's interesting to you in that moment. So leaning into that is, I think, the first step toward letting go of those external pressures and giving yourself permission to create and play.
And so far, inner authors or future authors, I see for the Anna Banana series, you have how many books now? Is it
8.
6? Oh,
8.
8. Okay. So did you plan out all 8 books ahead of time? Did you start off with one and then see how you could further develop? And later on, you had 8 books? How does that work?
I wrote the first one, as I said, Anna Banana and the Friendship Split, working through the emotions of a friendship breakup.
Okay.
And then not intending to publish it, not thinking it would get that far, maybe not wanting to psych myself out in those ways. And by the time I had revised it multiple times, gotten to a place where I felt proud of it and went through the process of submitting it to publishers through a literary agent, then it was the publisher who said, we would like this to be a series. Can it be a series? So they signed up 4 books, and I discussed with the editor I was then working with how we wanted that series to look. And then as the first 4 books went out into the world, they said, how about 2 more? How about 2 more? And that's how that process works. When you're working with a traditional publisher, they're going to decide the number once, if you're interested in turning it into a series. So I just wrote the 1 book to write the 1 book. And then I was very fortunate to have that opportunity for it to continue.
Is it overwhelming having, not, I wouldn't say necessarily having, but being offered the opportunity to write 7 more books in the same series and keep that interest level and that consistency in story?
Well, it was a very fun challenge. First of all, I didn't know if I could write a second book. I had only ever written 1 book, right? And so to do that under deadline and under contract felt very different as well from just, oh, I'm writing this for me on the weekends or in the morning. And then, yes, I had
think you said, by the way, that at one point you yourself were an editor, and
Yes.
you give yourself 40 minutes in the morning to try and write and focus, and then you had to go on to your day job. So
Right.
imagine deadlines and contracts and 40 minutes. Takes a lot of dedication and creativity.
Now that I write full time, I don't spend all day writing. There's only a limited amount of time that your brain can do that. So there, when I had only those 45 minutes, I then needed to spend my brain doing other things the rest of the day. But now as a full-time writer, there are still days where I only sit down to write for 45 minutes. And I'm lucky that while I'm doing the other things I do over the course of my day, I can still be thinking about my book and having a lot of the thinking that's an important part of writing happening as I go about the day. But I don't know anyone who sits down to write for 8 hours. That's an impossible goal. I set very low daily word counts. Now when I'm drafting, and again, this is my full-time job, I try to write 250 words a day, which sounds like nothing, but it adds up. It adds up to 14 published books. And it's a reasonable goal that sometimes I will exceed, but that I don't have to feel terrible about myself if I struggled to get there, because there are days when you'll struggle to get there, but then I've accomplished my goal and I can put it away, and I can feel that I can feel, instead of coming back the next day feeling like a failure with something to make up for, I feel like I did yesterday's writing and maybe today will be easier and I'll even exceed my goal, but all I have to do is write those 250 words. But when you were asking about how to write 8 books in a series, I had to find the thing that was interesting to me. Like I said, first you have to find that thing that's exquisitely interesting to you to lean into. I had the character set, I had the tone of the series and the voice set, and I could figure out, okay, here's what Anna, my main character, will be going through in any given book, but what's the thing that's interesting to me about it? So for example, in Anna Banana and the Puppy Parade, Anna and her 2 best friends are entering Banana the dog in a local dog competition, and they have different ideas about how Banana should be presented in the dog
I'm
parade.
sorry. Is each book a continuation of the prior book, or it's a new book each time?
It's a new book each time. You can read them out of order, but there's a bit of an arc to the friendships and it's the same characters.
Okay.
So again, there's there are great things about writing the same characters. You already know who your characters are, but then you have to keep it interesting to yourself, right?
Yes.
So for me, writing about this third grader who's having this, a little bit of a challenge of how do I, Anna's feeling like, well, Banana is my dog. I should get to decide what she does or doesn't do in the book, right? That feeling of both wanting to share and not wanting to share. I had to say, okay, what's the version that a 30-something adult, when I was writing this, can relate to there, right? What can I both look at in my own childhood that I can channel those emotions, because I never got to enter my dog in a dog show with my two best friends,
Sure.
but what emotional experience can I bring to that, right? And
And what
what
life
makes it
skill?
interesting to me now? What am I working through now, related to that?
Sure. And like I said, I apologize for interrupting, but it just
No problem.
so many thoughts in my head as we're talking.
Yeah,
What life skills do you think your book speaks to? So you were talking about, I think, sharing for a moment and decision making.
absolutely. And, in friendships, in a lot of the Anna Banana books, because she has two best friends, she often feels either caught in the middle when two people who are important to her want different things from her, and she doesn't feel
Mm.
like she can make them both happy at once, let alone also make herself happy.
Oh,
That's something I still struggle with in my 40s. I don't know about anybody else out there, but so thinking about it in terms of a third grader and thinking, well, gosh, maybe if I had read this book when I was chapter book reader age, I would have better skills for that now as a grown up.
and sometimes third
Or
graders are more adept at responding to those type of situations than the adults.
absolutely, especially when they've, been able to think about it in a story, when they're big readers. So
And it's so interesting that you write books for both elementary age and teenagers.
mm.
And so I'm curious, do you have formal training in being an author? Or this is something that you had a passion for and developed over time?
Well, as you mentioned, I used to be an editor, which is incredible training for writing. They're very different skills. As
Hmm.
an editor, my job was to read works in progress or completed manuscripts that authors had written, and to work with them to make it the best version of itself it could be. So what does that mean? It's not, here's what I would do to your book. It's, here's what I think you're trying to make the reader feel in this moment. Let me let you know how I, as a reader, felt or reacted to or wondered, ask you questions, give you feedback, just as a teacher does when they're reading their students' work sometimes for revision. Give that feedback and help them get it to that place. Because just as when we're going through something emotionally, we can't always see it clearly. When you've
Right.
written something, you can't see what's on the page. You could see what you imagined would be on the page,
Hmm.
but you need some kind of distance from it. And an editor can play that role of letting you know how somebody who did not write it experiences the story, and therefore helping you shape it to closer the experience that you were going through. And so doing that, working with so many amazing writers that I admire so much, I first of all got to see that the books that we read in the bookstore that we love and admire aren't that good, that before they're that good, that
Right.
every writer, people have different levels of how good their drafts are, how close to the final project their drafts are, but nobody's first draft is their final draft. They all have different approaches to revision. They all have different things that they need to work on to make it the book they want it to be. And so seeing other writers go through that process helped me be much easier on myself going through it, because I'd seen that it's not just the shiny finished perfect thing out there. And working with writers who were tackling so many different kinds of topics helped me really think about, well, how do I respond as a reader? Which is one of the most important things to develop if you're going to write, is thinking about what you love as a reader, what you don't love as a reader, why, what you wish the writer had been differently, and therefore learn to recognize those moments where there's a choice, where the book could have taken a different direction. Maybe that would have been more interesting to me as a reader, or maybe the reason I fell in love was that they went this way, and sort of breaking down all those elements of craft from the inside. I got to spend 14 years doing that, and it absolutely shaped who I am creatively in immeasurable ways. It was a real gift.
And so you've seen both sides. You've been the editor, and I guess
Mhm.
you've been the editee, the person
Now
who's
I am lucky to work with some very talented editors who helped me make my books what I wanted them to be and could not see that they weren't yet as I'm doing my drafts.
And so talking about social emotional and navigating relationships, how do you go about providing feedback in a way that the author doesn't feel like they're losing their voice, but at the same time they're also receptive to when you tell them what you think they're trying to say and what the potential audience is hearing? how do you go about doing that? Because as a teacher, sometimes we're so quick to just say no, or there's this idea now about providing feedback in a timely fashion, but in a way that is both supportive but also constructive. So how
Yeah,
do you go about navigating that?
that's a great question. And an editorial relationship, just like a student teacher relationship that's working at its best, is built on a fundamental level of trust. So first, how do you build that trust? Well, one of the ways as an editor that you build a writer's trust is by showing them that you understand what they're trying to do on the page, right? Because I can't help you get there with my feedback if I think the book should be something else than what you think it should be, right? And again, it's not what do I, the editor, think the book should be. It's what's my understanding of what the writer's trying to do and how can I help them get there? So positive, not just going in, no, 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 but going in, yes, this, and ooh, more of that. And this works really well, showing them what does work first. That's first of all gaining a level of trust and helping them not just feel like, oh, I have to throw the whole garbage thing away when that's not what's happening, right? So helping them see their own strengths is a very important part of the feedback, both so that they can keep doing more of that and so that they can see that you understand what's great about their writing, as well as where the weaknesses are or where there's room for more development. And then it's not just going in and saying, you need to do this. It's saying, here's what I wondered here. Here's what I noticed or paid attention to. Did you want me to feel this way? I wasn't sure if that, here I wondered if we might a little bit more this or a little less that. It's not prescriptive. It's useful feedback. Again, it's showing them how someone who didn't write the book might see it, and a very attuned someone. And going in and leaving room for them to experiment. And then part of it is giving space for the emotions that there are being edited. I was an editor for 14 years, so I know how invested and in love with a project an editor needs to be to acquire it and spend their time on it, probably their nights and weekends, because no editor has time to edit at her desk. And yet, when I get that loving editorial letter from my editor telling me all the things I did really well and asking smart questions and that are going to help me get it there, I need at least 3 days to pout and stomp around my apartment and say, nobody appreciates my genius, right? I know I need that time. I now build it into my process. Sometimes I need a little longer, sometimes I need a little less, even when I'm excited about the edits and where they're going to get me. I just need a little time to feel wounded that you didn't just put a gold star on my forehead and say it's perfect, because some part of me wants that. Not everybody wants that, but a lot of writers are going to have emotions around that. And that's fine. Give it space. And then during those 3 days while I'm pouting, her words will sink in and I'll start to think, well, yes, if I did need to change that thing with the friend, oh, what if this, or not that, but maybe this. And then by the time I'm done pouting, I'm ready to dig back in. So allowing space for that, the editor doesn't know best what should happen, but they can ask questions that are going to help the writer get to where they need to go, because the writer does know best, but they don't always know what's on the page really that they
So I
wrote.
think probably in addition to trust, a willingness to be vulnerable, and whether that means you could
Yes.
do it right away or you need those 3 days to pout around the apartment and stomp your feet. But yes, I can see the value in that. And working on a PhD myself in literacy and doing my dissertation, the first 3 chapters of my dissertation were probably the longest and consistent amount of writing I've done in my professional life. And so, you're chopping at the bit to get the feedback. And then sometimes when you get that feedback, you need that pout time. But then when you get also the positive reinforcement, I like this, let's develop it a little bit more. You start to develop that give and take where you realize, okay, she's not or he's not saying that this is not great, but we can develop it a little bit more and make it fantastic. So I
Yeah.
can definitely see the value in that trust and willingness to be vulnerable. Now, I'm looking at these books behind you. I'm assuming you work with a graphic artist and somebody who is really talented in images and drawing.
So besides getting to work with an editor, my editor has a whole department of people who help her bring the book out. There's a design department with a designer who hires the illustrator or the cover artist. There's, copy editors, production editors, sales teams. There are so many people who work on a book. No book is a solitary experience with a traditional publisher. I've been very lucky with the illustrators and the cover artists that I've gotten to work with, not only on the picture books where, more than half the story is told through the visuals. The text is only part of what's happening there.
But
The
for the
visual
visual
story
narrative,
is, I mean, look at that. That says so much
ah,
more than my text ever could. Mika Song's drawings here.
ah,
And one of the really fun things about actually picture books, especially, is leaving space for the visual story. When I'm writing it, Love Sophia on the Moon, I mentioned, she takes off in her rocket ship with her cat. And while she's there, she meets a new friend, Fergbert. On the moon, there's Fergbert. But I didn't actually say that Mr. Wubbles was a cat. The text mentions Mr. Wubbles and that, he went to the moon with me, but it was up to Mika what Mr. Wubbles would turn out to be. Could have been a stuffed
well,
animal, an imaginary friend, some other kind of pet. And on the moon, we meet Fergbert. But how does that go? I don't know. And I just showed you a picture of Sophia riding the moonicorns while she's there. And you
wait,
can
say that
see
again. I'm sorry. Did you say moonicorn?
riding moonicorns
Huh.
that she
I
finds on
thought
the
you said,
moon. And the
huh.
way Mika has depicted this is as one of their cows on the moon, of course, cows that jump over the moon. And the moonicorn is a cow wearing a constructed horn, and that moonicorn just wears that throughout. And she's also playing a game of make-believe, as Sophia is maybe also playing make-believe, as the back
So I'm
cover
assuming the
indicates.
team you talked about that puts all this together along with you. I'm assuming maybe they're doing something like storyboarding to make sure that it all meshes. So taking your text and then the images and making sure everything's consistent. It sounds like quite the endeavor, but talking about that chill up and down the spine when you see the moonicorn, that's really just so cool. So I can definitely see how that attracts multiple audiences. And for the visual learners, you know, not every student is motivated to read, especially on the younger age. But when they see these fun images and they can make the connections, that's really quite fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm so grateful for the people who make the amazing covers and interior illustrations of my book, because it makes all the difference. And it's the first thing a reader sees, right? It's the last thing I see in the process of making a book, but it's the first thing someone who's thinking about picking that up is. So it sets the whole mood and the tone, and it's so important. What's that story going to be?
Wow.
Here's your first hint of it, right? Is what you see there. So yeah, I absolutely love that part of the process of getting to work with the people who do the visuals, and grateful for their skills that they lend those talents to my
Oh,
books.
wow.
Yeah.
Such detail, and how cool is that?
Yeah, these are drawn by Carolina Godina, who lives in Spain, and she is incredible. Just every picture she made for Hide and Don't Seek blew me away.
And so, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We're gonna start to wrap up here. But I think the $64,000 question that I didn't ask you: are there any particular authors that influence you in your writing?
Mm.
And again, it's possible I'm asking this question on purpose because I did a little homework leading up to our conversation. Give myself a pat on the back here. So go ahead. Who has influenced you, if anyone?
So many, especially all of the writers that I got to work with as an editor. I just finished a book by Corey Ann Haydu. She wrote a new novel called Lawless Spaces, which is a novel in verse, exploring intergenerational trauma for all of the teenagers that you're working with. It's focusing on a 16-year-old girl, and it's looking at her mother and her grandmother and her great-grandmother when they were 16 as well, and what they were going through then, and how that changes how they interact with the 16-year-old now, as what she's discovering in her life, and what it is to be in a perceived female body moving through the world. So that was incredible.
Diverse classrooms. That's definitely sounds like a strong read for the curriculum. Sure.
And she wrote some of my favorite middle grade novels, especially talking about social emotional learning, not only, seeing yourself in the mirrors of those books, but also the window or the sliding glass doors, as Dr. Rudine Sims Bishops talks about in her writing about children's literature, that let us experience what somebody else might be going through. Corey's books, especially for middle grade readers, those sort of 8 to 12-year-olds, 8 to 13, explore a lot of situations with children going through various forms of anxiety, or a parent who is struggling with substance abuse or is sort of absentee. And it's the kind of book that sometimes gatekeepers will say, that's not appropriate for children. And I think Corey will always say, so are you telling me my life wasn't appropriate for me? Right. And right. So for the child who was experiencing any of those, what we think of, that tough thing to go through, the value of seeing another kid go through it on the page is enormous and immense. And she also just is a phenomenal writer who writes great things. So I'm, just finished one of her books, like I said, so therefore she's fresh on my mind. But I read widely across genres, categories, in adults, nonfiction, fiction, graphic novels, for all ages of children. And I'm always drawing from what I'm reading or experiencing in the world, because all of it informs what I see that day or how I'm thinking. And I got that way because of teachers engaging with me about what I was reading. What do you notice? What do you see? What does it make you think about? Your opinions are valued. Tell me what it makes you want to say or see. What can you relate to? What do you wonder? And learning to be that kind of reader, where my engagement with the text matters, help me grow up to be somebody who might be able to write my own text, right? That the things I would have to say, not only in response to someone else, but just telling a story might matter as well. So that's been so valuable.
So interesting. And thank you so much. And why don't you finish by, again, directing us to your website, how people can reach out to you, maybe pen pal even, and find your books.
Sure. My website is anicarissi.com, ANICARISSI.com. And on the contact page on my website, you can find my physical mailing address. If you'd like to send me a letter, I will write back. And you can also find me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm at Anica Rissi on both.
Anica Rissi, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us as we discuss the connection between literacy and social emotional learning. And my name is Greg Gersh, the proud president and founder of Gersh Literacy Associates. You see our information here on the screen, and we look forward to sitting down with all kinds of stakeholders for these important conversations. And we hope that one day I'll speak with you again and continue this important conversation. And look out for these books. It looks like my reading list just got a little bit longer. But it's definitely been a pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation.